Good afternoon again, everyone. For those of you who joined us, those last few weeks or these last few months, then welcome back. If you're new to all of this, then welcome. If you have been with us before, you'll notice that Sean changed the hold music there. It's good. It's snappy this time. Bonjour et bienvenue. Si vous avez nous joindre pour nos autres webinaires, merci. Si c'est votre première fois, très bien. On espère que vous trouvez la valeur aujourd'hui. I'm Mark Healy. I'm the executive director here at the Ivy Academy. That's the learning and development wing of Ivy Business School in London. Je suis le chef d'éducation exécutif à l'école de commerce Ivy à l'Université Western en Ontario. Well, folks, it's arrived. The famous demarcation line, or at least one of them that we've talked about a few times over the past few months. It's an important time for families. It's also an important time for economic recovery and the path forward. And that's back to school. I literally walked, my two girls to school day one this morning for, our staggered smart in our small town in Ontario. The teachers, if I'm being honest, look more like CDC scientists than educators, but here we go, off we go. So we thought it was important that we kind of check in on some of what we talked about leading up to today over the last few months and where we think we're going. So we're really lucky to be rejoined by three very regular contributors here at Ivy. We've got Professor Tony Frost with us again. Tony's a faculty member in international business at Ivy, a faculty director here at the Academy. Tony spends his time at kind of the corner of economics and strategy. He's given us a bit of an economic balcony view in the past. We hope he'll do that again today. Kevin O'Brien, who's HBA 93, is back with us. Kevin's contributed at Ivy over the years in many capacities and was given an award for it. He's president and GM of WW Canada. He's talked a fair amount with us in the past about business transformation, digital, and some of the opportunities through all this. He'll help us again on that front today. And we're also lucky to have Larissa Chaikowsky, MBA 04. She's back with us. Larissa is also an alum of our inaugural coaching academy class here, and she's Chief Operating Officer at U.S. Wealth Management for BMO. She's in the past helped us with some views on U.S. economy, the situation in general in the U.S., the impact of COVID on homeowners and Main Street, among other topics. And so we'll contribute on those fronts again today. So welcome to all of you, and thanks for rejoining us. Sean, can you just give us a quick flyby on what we should expect in terms of tech and flow today?
Sure. Welcome back, everyone. Bienvenue. As you're listening to the conversation today, feel free to jump in with questions or comments by clicking the chat or Q&A icons in the bottom of your window. If you've joined us before, you'll know there's a bit of a flow to these sessions. We'll be watching for the highest voted questions and then do our best to answer them throughout and towards the end. We'll share a link to the recording by email with everyone registered here today, but our past broadcasts are also posted online at our blog at ivyacademy.com. To anyone watching from YouTube, you can also register to participate in upcoming sessions at ivyacademy.com/events. Thanks for joining us, and back to you, Mark.
Okay, thanks a lot, Sean. Tony, I think we're gonna start with you. So if memory serves, I think it was June 4th when we were together. The world was in quite a different place at that point. I think you told me I love Woo, and I think I said I love Woo back when we were talking about shapes of recovery. And so I hope we get into that today. But that was kind of stage one of reopening. Now here we are in stage three, and all these months later. So over to you, I guess, to give us a bit of an overview, please.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, great to be back together with the band, and I still love Woo. But I thought I will indeed start with a little macro snapshot. Hey, first, just a quick shout out to current and former students, and also all to Mark, you and all the parents with young children. Oh my gosh, you folks have a tough job right now. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, not much, but mention it. So much to choose from to talk about. As you say, we haven't been together since June, really on this panel. Much has changed, and I'll talk a little bit about that. So I had to kind of select. I'm going to share my screen just because I think I've got some data here that will be probably useful for you. So I'm just going to share my screen here. Sean, can you give me a thumbs up? We can all see that. Okay.
All set here, Tony.
Good,
thanks.
very good. So I'll just kind of frame up what we're doing in no more than 10 minutes. And then we'll, as Sean said, we'll engage in some Q&A and so on, and maybe I'll make some other points along there. But, the question I get asked all the time is, well, Tony, are you optimistic or pessimistic about the economy? where are we on this? And that's usually a starting point for a good conversation. And the answer is yes, I am. I think there's reasons for both. I know that's an annoying kind of trait of economists, but I don't think there's really any to see it any other way. Although I've started to treat this question more like a personality question than an actual data question, and I tend to seem to come down more on the pessimistic side. But I've got three themes to just share with you, and I thought, Mark, what I would do is just cover off the first one in a little bit of depth, but just at a high level, and then we'll definitely get into that with Kevin and Larissa on what's going on at the industry and firm level, and with workers and work from home and all that kind of stuff. Hit the first two, and then we'll leave the last one, which I think is sort of longer looking, and maybe we'll do that towards the end. But the last time we were together, when we started these series, of course, everybody was kind of in the same boat, right? We had the great lockdown, global kind of phenomena of shelter in place, essential industries only. Everybody was kind of doing their own thing. And I feel like what's changed a lot is we've gone from that to some kind of great variation, where there's just a variety of different experiences and policy responses and outcomes. And so that's a more complicated world, and I want to talk a little bit about that. And then to talk a bit about the upcoming fall. So we pegged this way back, March, April, May, when we were doing these things, that fall's going to be pivotal. We all are had been talking about second waves, and knowing the history of the 1918 pandemic. So I've got my little tag there as fall is storm season, right? So I'm going to talk just briefly about that, and then to focus on something that has got to be on everybody's mind here, which is what's going on in the U.S. And I'm calling it, perfect storm squared. I'll sort of try to explain that in a minute. And then I'll leave the last one, which is more longer looking. So strangely, I've become sort of more optimistic about the present. And as I look to the longer future, outcomes and outlook for trend growth or, kind of GDP over a long period of time, I feel like there's some serious headwinds or scarring, maybe a better word, to talk about. So we'll kind of get into that. And I know we've already even had a question on debt. So I'm, channeling folk music here, and I'm saying, oh, debt. What does it mean? Is it a big problem to have this level of deficits and debt that we're seeing? So maybe we can talk about that. Okay, so I'm going to hit those first two, Mark, and then I'll quickly, and then we'll turn it over back to you for the panel.
Great, perfect, thanks.
So, from great lockdown to great variations. So, so my picture on the left here, so I think probably a lot of our audience saw this picture. Believe it or not, that's Wuhan in about 2 weeks ago. That's their big pool celebrated party. Notice hardly anybody's wearing a mask. There's no social distancing going on whatsoever. And on the right-hand side, I'm showing a New York Times article that is talking about the resurgence of cases in Europe. Particularly Spain is just kind of going a little crazy right now, along with France and so on. And it almost seems to me like what's going on is if you're successful in the first part, there generates a complacency that then seeds the roots of its own demise. And I'm out in BC right now, and we are seeing that here. There was so much complacency on all of the things that we know we need to do, masking, distancing, and so on. And guess what? Up bumps the case count. And Wuhan's got it, completely the opposite. They have, of course, had the epicenter of the whole thing, and now they've flipped over to being basically zero cases. And look at them; it looks like a back to normal environment. So there's a lot of variation. I don't need to tell you this because you're reading about it every day in the pandemic dynamic itself. And one just thinks about even if you just go look at the U.S. I've got some U.S. data on the economy, but you know what's going on in the virus, and just again, what a state that was the epicenter, New York, has one of the best now in sort of new case rates because they know what they need to do, right? Whereas the states that were perhaps okay, didn't have much of a problem back in March, April, are now the ones that are kind of trending badly because they just didn't have that same kind of exposure or that experience. And I'm not talking about herd immunity here at all. That's not part of the story. It's more behavior. And I want to talk about that a little bit later too. Let me give you a quick snapshot. So Mark, back to our shapes and so on. Do we see a V-shaped recovery? Well, I'm showing you here a kind of messy chart. I got a couple of these messy charts, but they hopefully will kind of illustrate the basic point I want to make, which is this is a composite leading indicator. So it's just a amalgam of several forward-looking indicators of the economy that largely track future GDP and economic activity. And what you can see is, there's some evidence there of what looks like a V-shaped bounce in these composite indicators. But recovery, I would suggest to you, is a bit of a stretch. And this is a point I'm going to kind of come back to here in just as I roll through this. Again, unemployment rates tell the same story, but notice what you see is the big spike in unemployment, then a pattern of recovery. But in most economies, Canada being a good example here, you see a situation where the unemployment rate is far above what it was before. So have we recovered? No. Are we improving? Yes, we are, but still dire levels in most economies. And my third slide on this is a slide that I had, a chart I showed back in the the June webinar. And it's a GDP Now estimate, which is useful for looking at what's happening in real time because of our indicators come out with long lags, that our stats on the economy come out with long lags. So this is a real-time forecast of Q3 GDP. What I'm showing you is on the right-hand side, that is, on the left-hand side over here, this was what I showed you back in June for the estimates in Q2. And if you look at the green line going down there, you can see that what this is basically showing is that the Fed, using its nowcast estimate, was predicting somewhere around a 50% quarter-over-quarter fall in economic activity. And on the right-hand side, you can see it's looking a lot better, and we're now looking at a positive bump of somewhere around, kind of in that 30% range. But just remember this is my point here, is that V-shaped, yes, recovery, no. If your economy shrinks by 50%, from 100 to 50, it's got to then double. It's got to go up by 100% to get back to normal baseline. So this recovery you see of between 20 and 30% is important, but it doesn't look like return back to normal. Here's another kind of snap on this, again using U.S. data, showing you here U.S. job claims. And what you can see is, again, huge spike in the initial job claim. So this is initial filings of joblessness in the United States, an important labor metric. And you can see that, is it getting better? Yes, it's getting better. But look at the numbers are still pretty high. And when I say pretty high, here's a little bit of historical experience. So again, off the charts, right? Nearly 6 million initial jobless claims at one point, as we were, in the thick of the initial wave. And now we have far less than 1 million, but it's still an elevated number by any historical standard. And by that, I mean, if I even go back a little bit further, put this current number over here on the right into the perspective of the so-called Great Recession. What I used to tell my students is the biggest downturn in post World War II and maybe since the Great Depression, and it just dwarfs it completely. So it's getting better, but still a long way to go. I've got just a couple of other slides here to show with you. So just a bit of a forecasting, get a sense of where we're at. The OECD's come out with, I think, kind of a helpful set of estimates. They have got a baseline forecast. This is still on unemployment. Baseline forecast, and then they've developed some estimates on whether they think what they think will happen if we get sort of a second wave. What they call the double hit scenario. That's this solid dot there. And so what you can see is for Canada, what they're saying is they expect in 2020 Q4, we're going to have a 9% unemployment rate still, obviously well above our kind of full employment rate, that's for sure. And their second wave, if we get a second wave, they're saying above 10. US number over here in the blue, somewhere around 10%, and with the worst case scenario up back over 15-17% if things go bad again. So that's unemployment. I've got the exact same chart for OECD, or sorry, for GDP. And what basically they're forecasting, which seems reasonable to me, is overall, when all is said and done, we're going to be around -8% at the end of the year, and that's for the fourth quarter, or for the year, and the U.S. Somewhere around the same. So a huge, unprecedented, really downturn is what we're still talking about, even while things are improving. Just going to hit just a couple more points and then stop. My second theme after that little snapshot is, what's ahead, right? We know that fall is historically in North America this hurricane season, storm season, and we've got a bunch of things coming up, of course, schools and all what that implies in terms of virus outbreaks, our movement indoor, the traditional flu cold season. So the idea here is, a second wave or third or fourth or whatever we're into seems at least plausible. And a question I'm raising here that I would like to, maybe we'll explore a little bit. It seems to me that we're in a situation in terms of our state of mind, our whatever you want to call it, our experiences, that it would be, I think, very difficult for us to engage in maybe what would be a medically or health needed great lockdown, another lockdown that is, if we have a virus outbreak. I mean, not only do we see a little bit predictable protests in the US, but now, even in Germany, where you think that they're going to be a lot more amenable and agreeable to take actions that like they did the first time, it's there's lots of protests against it, and people saying we just aren't going to take it anymore. And so, what does that look like if we have the big breakout and we can't lock down? We're just going to be in a kind of a scary situation. I want to close here just in my snapshot just by talking a little bit about U.S. The perfect storm. I'm calling it perfect storm squared. That's probably a little confusing, but I actually was in Boston for the original perfect storm, which was a confluence of a set of actually three different systems that merged together and turned into this perfect storm. And if you think about the US right now, it feels to me like there's at least 5 identifiable serious storms, right? You got the health storm, which is ongoing and not being well managed. I think most people would agree. The economy, I just showed you these numbers. I mean, they're trending better, but still not in great shape. And if you add in the unlikely passage, I think, of a significant, call it a COVID, bill that would provide additional support spending, could be very dire. And then add in the social, all the stuff that's going on and has been going on since May and June on not just Black Lives Matter, but a broad set of unrest, I think. Throw in all the political dynamics around the election and uncertainty around that, and then bring in kind of international relations, globalization. This feels to me like the potential for a significant, downside story here. And of course, pay attention, because when will that storm arriving? Well, I'm predicting somewhere around November 3rd would be my baseline guess on when that storm is going to fully manifest itself. And so, of course, here in Canada, but really in the world, we depend a lot on what goes on in the U.S. and for our economy. So this is, I think, the worst case scenarios if all of these 5 storms pull together in the wrong setup. Would be terrible, not just for the U.S., but for us and really the world. So on that super happy note, I'm going to leave my future prognosis, which is probably just about as pessimistic, I think. Not really, but I'm just going to make sure we have lots of time for conversation. I'll add value where I can. Mark, back to you.
Great. Sean's busily researching a crisis prevention hotline. He'll put the phone number up for anybody that feels like they need to talk to someone next.
I try not to do that. I don't know. It just happens. Sorry about that.
Larissa, I want to come to you next. We had you on, I think, last for Global Ivy Day. It was in early May. Your teams were at that time kind of feverishly working to distribute funds from the government and relief programs, and thinking about loss provisions and looking ahead a bit. I just want to kind of catch up. Where do you think you are now? Where's your organization now? What's your sort of view of the U.S.? Do you want to counter any of what Tony just said?
Off mute there. I think that I'm going to build on what Tony said actually, and use his analogy a little bit around the storm. I think the public stimulus is masking the true magnitude of the storm to come, and so we're hunkering down for that fight for sure. I think the good news is, though, the banking industry in general is in great shape. The capital ratios are in great shape. We're ready for this. And so we're trying to be proactive, and we can expand on that a little bit later. But what I'll say is that perfect storm, it's hard because it keeps changing directions on us too, right? It's one of those, we take 2 steps forward, 1 step back. And if I use Chicago as an example of that, when we were in May, we talked about walking down Michigan Avenue and the stores were boarded up because nobody was out and about and shopping. Well, the boards came down, and then the first wave of civil unrest hit. The boards went back up again. And then you had the movement with, the public safety protests and what that really means. And now you walk down Michigan Avenue, it's still boarded up, but there's police officers everywhere. And you're seeing things like some of the iconic U.S. Tourist attractions like Navy Pier just shutting down. And so, I'm optimistic. By the way, I always say storms have rainbows at the end. And so I actually am quite optimistic, and I think we are as an organization, but we're shifting focus to say, what is going to be what makes us and our clients successful in the future? And a lot of that has to do with getting out ahead and trying to predict what's to come. So, thinking about restructuring early, not waiting until companies and clients are in distress, having those conversations now. And so, I think we're not back to normal, but I would say what we're trying to do is normalize a very turbulent environment.
Thanks a lot. And, Kevin, let's, I guess, round out this part of the conversation. Could you just maybe catch the audience? You've been with us a few times. I think the last time was also in June. So if you want to give like a quick recap of the pivot that you affected, and maybe spend a bit more time on what's happened kind of the last 2-3 months.
Sure. So for just to do on the recap part of things, just so that everybody baselines, the nature of our business, used to be Weight Watchers, if you're not familiar with WW Canada. The nature of the business is every member that we have is somebody that's on a healthy journey of some type, and we've got various different facets to that. Everybody gets the app, and then a certain number of people also then chose historically to go to a physical workshop, kind of once, a couple of times a week. So obviously when COVID, March 12th, 13th, when we had to make some calls around what we're going to do on the physical part of the business, inside of a week, we shut down all of the physical and stood up virtual workshops for the first time. And it actually went remarkably well. And what we were really worried about was the cancel rates on those folks that were workshop members, because the revenue on those people is twice as high as the revenue that we have on the folks that are just on the app. Obviously, margins are really good on the people that are just on the app, but the revenue is twice as high. And the good news is, even up to today, cancel rates have been really very good. So the reaction to virtual has been really positive. And I think if there's a silver lining, kind of in a more macro sense, in a lot of what we've been going through, I think there is a heightened awareness of the importance of having good health. We've obviously been, beneficiaries of that, but it's not just to us. I think in general, the data is quite clear. The WHO will show you that morbidity rates are 7 times as high for people that are obese if they get COVID. Like it's ridiculously bad. And so I think the starkness of that has woken people up to an appetite to, no pun intended, to do something more positive for themselves. And and we've been able to step into that. So our digital member growth has been really, really strong. In fact, we ended Q2 with as many members as we had at the end of Q1. And historically, what you see, everybody wakes up January 1st and says they want to transform their lives. And then that trends down over the course of the year. It's not normal that we would see members at the same level at the end of Q2 that we would see at the end of Q1. And in fact, that's where we were. But the mix of that was quite different. Historically, we would have seen 75% digital folks signing up, maybe even 2/3, and 25 to 1/3, people also signing up for workshop. Now that's like 90-10, right? It's been a very different mix of that, despite the fact that the reaction of virtual has been really positive. So what it's actually in some ways allowed us to do or forced us to do, and you're hearing this more generally when people talk about the impact on business, is embrace what was something that we were thinking about anyway, which was how do we virtualize parts of the business. And so the virtual workshop that we're delivering is not going to go away. It's not going to be a stopgap. In fact, you could look at it this way and say, in the course of the last 6 months, because we're almost at the 6-month mark here, we've actually stood up a new business that is this virtual workshop business, and we've got people signing up for it, albeit at lower levels. And if we had set goals for establishing a virtual workshop business, I'm not sure we would have set the goals a lot higher than where we are right now, right? It's actually been quite a positive transformation. What I wouldn't have predicted is that starting up the physical, I wouldn't have predicted that actually standing things down would have been the hard part of the equation. That kind of trying to reopen becomes the harder part. It is a trick when you're actually trying to open up places that you normally would have had 40 to 100 people, and you can put 12 or 16. The economics of that aren't great. You obviously want to do what's right for your customers. You want to kind of put things on life support so you've got things to build on as we come out of this. That's really my biggest concern as I think about not just WW, but in general, is how do we have the right things over the next while so that those things that we want to have, in pick your date, 12 to 18 months from now, actually still exist. How do we still have movie theaters? How do we still have the retailers that we want to have with physical locations? How do we have WW with a healthy, physical workshop business? Because we don't want that to go away. But certainly for now, the transformation of virtual has opened up a whole new opportunity for us and is allowing us to serve members in a different way. Jane in Quebec can join a workshop with Joan in Alberta, and that didn't used to be the case, right? So there's new avenues, there's new opportunities for us on things that we weren't able to do before that this has forced us to be able to do.
But I think the stage is set here. Thank you to all of you. We've got glimpses of macro and glimpses of micro, and they're not always going to be congruent, which is kind of one of the themes here. I guess, Tony, I want to come back to you. And, we have talked a fair amount about shape of recovery. We actually had Craig Alexander on here. He's the chief economist at Deloitte, and asked him straight up this question too. And he sort of acknowledged that the shape of recovery is the addition of a number of different shapes, and you don't necessarily get a sort of a nice clear picture when you draw all of those shapes. So what's kind of your view as you look at, I don't know, say now till the end of the year?
Yeah, well, we're really playing with two scenarios, and this is what the OECD did. I thought that was helpful. This is basically said, okay, let's assume baseline, and we kind of carry on. We're not going to, we're not in a vaccine environment yet, so there's going to be outbreaks. But let's assume we don't go to a big outbreak again and have to think about shutting down if not completely more than we have. So if baseline, I would say we're going to kind of carry on. My mantra back in our earlier panels was we take the elevator down and the escalator back up. And I feel like that's what, just like my portfolio, and the escalator is not all the way back up, by the way. But that's, I feel like what's kind of my baseline view is that we're going to kind of continue to do that unless we have a worst case scenario. An interesting question that I suppose we'll probably get to at some point is, what does the vaccine introduce into that?
Yeah.
For sure. But I think that's my scenario. But I thought, TD had a very useful disaggregation of the LUV sort of what's the recovery story, by showing that, the recovery story is the summation or aggregation of what's happening at the micro level. So, just this week, did we not see a bunch of reports all over the world? I saw Singapore, I saw several in Europe, in North America, on airlines are now like, okay, we're just not viable. We keep adding, we're adding flights, nobody's showing up. So here's what we have to do, 70% capacity cut. Singapore Airlines, Western World Airline is laying off a huge swath of people. So some of those businesses are just not coming back, and to Kevin's point, are not going to be viable as a business at 35 to 40% of capacity, because the prices you would have to charge to make it viable are going to actually, scare away demand there. So they're into this phase 2, which looks to me like downsizing, and that's going to be a chunk of those industries that are in our economy that are out there that are just going to stay flatlined, or do what some people are calling, the K-shaped recovery, right? Which is some are going up and some are going down. And the overall story to your question is the aggregation of that. But don't lose the micro piece of it, is my point.
Yeah, so let's go to the micro. I mean, we talked in the prep about movie theaters, and I shared my story, and we see it here. Humans are tricky to understand at the best of times, and these are not the best of times. And even here at the school, that the data on return to work or return to class, desire to and willingness to, has not, I would say, has not matched the actual behavior when the rubber hit the road. And so Kevin and Larissa, like, how are you trying to gauge that, customers and employees, and what are you seeing? Are you seeing mismatches in the data, or is it kind of playing out the way that pulse surveys or whatever you're using are showing they should?
Kevin, do you want me to start maybe? It's fascinating, because if you rewind back to, April, when we first started this journey, I call it, we surveyed our people, and 80% of people said, I want to be back in the office. I want to be back full time. And as the summer has progressed, and as human behavior would dictate, we get very, very used to alternative ways of working, and we're getting pretty good at it, actually. I mean, nothing's going to substitute people being in the same room together. I believe that personally. But what we found is we've surveyed again. Fewer people are saying they want to come back. And actually, in my business, we had an opportunity to open up the aperture. So we said we can go to 20% capacity. We're keeping it to 20% capacity for a couple of reasons. The main one is, in our large urban centers, is public transportation. We're trying to be good corporate citizens. We can work from home, so we should work from home. And we thought, oh my goodness, there's going to be this mad rush of people trying to sign up to come into the office. 80% of people said they wanted to be here. And of course, what's happened is the complete opposite. We're not filling any of that capacity at this moment in time. I think part of that has to do with some of the pressures that young families are facing, for sure. Needing to stay closer to home, the lack of vaccine, people are worried about public transportation and other things. But I also think the people who are coming in then experience what it's like, and it doesn't feel so great. They are one of a few people there. They have to wear a mask unless they're sitting at their desk. None of the restaurants they're used to being free, the food courts, things like that, the services they're used to being able to have at their fingertips aren't there anymore. And so, I don't like the half-baked idea is very challenging to manage through. I do think in the long term, we're going to see what many people are talking about from a hybrid perspective. We're kind of saying that people outside of those who service our clients directly, who are, have been putting their lives at risk, frankly, over the last 6 months. And I'm very thankful for all of those employees who have been doing that. But in the headquarters functions, we're saying people will probably be back half time. very few people are going to come back full time. They don't need to. And actually, people are loving the flexibility that they're gaining without the 3-hour commutes in the big urban centers. Being able to spend more time. I mean, the stories I've been hearing about people spending more time with their kids, with their family, with their friends. It's even in this environment where, you know, you're staying socially distanced. They're actually really heartwarming stories. And I think, to be honest, we might be better off at the end of the day. And like Kevin said before, we never would have made these changes had something like this not happened. And so I don't think we go all the way to this remote, working environment. I don't think that helps anybody. But I do think this flexibility, and I keep calling it the and syndrome. I think we're going to see that all over the place. People are going to want to be able to go to the office, and they're going to want to stay home. They're going to want to be able to go to a movie theater and rent the newest release at home. And so, you know, that polarity of trying to manage all of that, I think, is going to be the next challenge that corporate America and others need to figure out, because it's actually an expensive model to try to maintain.
For sure. Kevin, what are your comments here?
Yeah, I'll speak to two different facets of it, Mark. The first is, you know, our membership and their willingness to return to our physical locations. I will say that we're kind of selling out what we've opened, but what we've opened is such a small percentage of our pre-COVID capacity. I'm not sure it's the right metric. Like, so if you only looked at percent of workshops that are at 100%, you'd say, oh, no, people are returning. But that's like 20%, maybe 10% of what our capacity was pre-COVID. Like, it's probably not the right metric. And if we tried to open up at the scale we were, I guarantee we wouldn't be at the scale we were. I think the good news in all of it is, at least in Canada, people are playing by the rules. If you're supposed to wear a mask, people are wearing masks. So I think we've put culturally the right things in place to allow us to have a certain degree of recovery. I went to Tenet at the movie theater last weekend, and, you know, my theater was sold out at like 48 seats of a 350 seat theater. So again, people are there, and Cineplex to a certain degree can scale their employment base to kind of, like, you know, there was only 3 people at the concession. But, you know, I don't know. I just don't know. I don't know their business well enough to know how viable that is. I will say that a lot more people, you know, why are our workshop signups down as much as they are? You have to suppose that a good chunk of that is because people are thinking really what they want is a physical workshop, but they don't really want that right now, right? And I'm reading between the lines to say that, but, you know, it's reinforced by a lot of the research we've done as well. The other part of it, though, is as an employer, as I think about, you know, opening our head offices out in Oakville, as I think about reopening that, a couple of thoughts on that. One is, we closed really before we had to. We closed, you know, March 12th. It wasn't mandated for us to be closed at that point. The reason we closed when we did was because we realized that we were asking the wrong question. The question that we had been asking ourselves to that point was, what would have to be true for us to close? And then on March 12th, we asked ourselves the question, wait a minute, what would have to be true for us to stay open? Because we really did, as a leadership team, come to the conclusion that we were part of the problem, not part of the answer. Like, there was no real reason why we needed to have everybody come to the office every day. We had a hypothesis that said, you know what, we can probably function pretty well from home, and that's been borne out by reality. Nothing's really different now versus March 12th. We don't have a vaccine. We don't have herd immunity. Like, there's no real compelling reason at this point to reopen the office. I will say that the attitudes and mental impact, if I could look at it that way, of not being in the office is not evenly distributed. Some people are freaking out. Some people are really, really miss being in the office. It's not good, especially now that their kids have gone back to school and stuff. Like, they're feeling isolated and alone in their homes, and that's like, some people are wired for that. Other people are not wired for that the same way. That's on my mind. But there's a real practical reality on my mind as well. And we're still closed at this point, just to be clear. We're not even selectively open. We're debating, do we actually selectively open right now? One of the things on my mind about selectively opening is, right now we've got a level playing field. If we want to talk about, you know, a promotion to drive virtual workshop signups, what do? We schedule a Zoom with the people that need to be part of that discussion. If we were selectively open, and half the marketing team was in the office and half the marketing team wasn't, my concern is we would have discussions going on with those people that were sitting next to each other, that they would forget to invite the people that were not there. And we'd end up in this divide of people and who's actually being involved in decisions and things like that. I actually quite like the scenario right now that we're all on a level playing field, and not being on that level playing field, frankly, makes me a little bit nervous. So we'll see where we land. I think we'll probably in the next few weeks make the call that, like Larissa mentioned, we'll let some capacity go in. You'll have to pre-book. There'll be some, there'll be protocols. You won't use the fridge. You won't use the coffee machine, those sorts of things. But I do get nervous about that. And if it was, if I wasn't paying attention to that mental health part of it, I would actually just stay closed, I think. But I'm recognizing the fact that especially as the weather gets worse, I'm not sure that that's going to be the right answer for everybody. So I think we're going to have some flexibility.
On this point, one thing I'm thinking a fair amount about, I think we are thinking a fair amount about here at the Academy, trying to provide perspective to mostly to business people and managers, is the idea that we might be prisoners of the moment here and how to avoid that. It's not been a full business cycle for anyone, right? We're 6 months in, and the idea of kind of delaying decisions or kicking the can down the road, nobody loves that, but you can sort of understand why you would do that because you just don't have a complete data set. In your head, you don't have a complete data set. The idea of making kind of strict, permanent, big decisions, I find really strange, personally. In nowhere else in life or in business would you do that, and why you would do it now is sort of beyond me. And yet you see it. So perhaps I'm just in the minority. So what do we make of that? Of this, I guess, desire to make decisions and create some certainty, while at the same time recognizing that we kind of don't know a lot yet, not having been through a business cycle.
You make a great point, Mark, but I think it actually presents a really interesting opportunity to take new directions you wouldn't have in the past, like Kevin was mentioning with the virtual nature of workshops that didn't exist. So I think about the partnerships that all of a sudden these large banks are forming with external organizations. It never would have happened this way, this fast in the past. And, so BMO's partnered now with Google to do Google Pay. In the past, we would have shied away perhaps from something like that for the fear of the, additional risk that comes with that. But we're moving in the way that clients are moving. And I think we know enough about some things to be able to make big decisions. There are other things that I think we just don't know. But, if you look at the trending data, people are getting more comfortable with digital because they have to. Right? Clients that would never have met us via video conference all of a sudden are, saying, we don't want to come into the office. Thank you very much. We'd rather meet via video. We're doing training programs with our clients on how to use digital banking, digital investment solutions. And so, we know enough that some of these things are going to stick. And so I think you can make big decisions, big plays around those things are going to stick. And we're able to do them a lot faster than we would have in the past out of business necessity, because some of those other revenue streams, some of those other things we relied on for so long have gone away. So you have to find alternative ways to engage with your customers, your clients, and to generate money, frankly. And so I agree. There are some big decisions that are daunting that are going to be impossible, but I do think you can focus on some of the things that we think are fundamentally going to change as a global society as a result of this.
Yeah, maybe I could jump on there as well, which is I like to think of myself as a relatively decent analytically driven strategy guy. It's kind of what I've spent my career doing. And data sucks right now. And what I mean by that is I don't know three things. I don't know what a post-COVID world looks like because I don't actually know what a vaccine means.
Yep.
I don't know when that's going to happen. And I don't know how people are actually really going to behave between now and then, because there's going to be lots of, unpredictable factors that go into that. So, you'd love to be able to have a 2x2 where you kind of dimensionalized a couple of unknown factors and, put some quadrants together and said, if we end up here, it looks like this. There's, in my opinion right now, there's too many of those unknowns to actually do that in any kind of meaningful way. And so what that has defaulted, us to do as we think about the next 12 months is to reduce things back to the point where we've got maximum optionality. So I would be inclined to cut deeper, cut harder, mothball more, knowing that I'd rather start from a lower spot than ideal when I rebuild than not go deep enough in the interim. And I don't like that because that has real profound impacts on lots of different people. But if I knew for certain that June 1st next year was when we were going to come out of this, and that when we came out, here's how customers were going to behave, great, I could plan for that. And I could do things that are very, very smart now about how to take advantage of that. I don't know that. And so what I'm doing is doing as many different things to keep our powder dry as we can, and to double down on the parts of the business that I know will help fund whatever it is we're going to be trying to fund, in 12 to 18 months.
Tony, I want to bring you in on this point too. Maybe you can kind of bridge us into the last territory anyway, which we bled into a little bit, which is, whether a vaccine and ODAT. How do you look at this, and where do you think it goes?
Well, I guess the change in for me, just in conceptually, has been all of a sudden I had this kind of vague notion, maybe a lot of us did, that a vaccine was a binary variable, 1-0. You have a vaccine, you don't have a vaccine. Now I've got a much more kind of interval scale on that because there's so many unknowns, not just about the efficacy of the vaccine, but of course the uptake, the distribution, and so on. So this is why I actually think some of the airlines are making these moves now, is because they've had this epiphany too. They're like, you know what? We've been holding on, because the vaccine, when it happens, it's going to be, ding dong, the wicked witch is dead, and we're back to normal. And now I think a lot of people are going like, no, actually, that's not going to be what happens, because the vaccine won't be distributed broadly enough. It may not be as effective, et cetera. And so I think what they're saying is the new reality is something different, even under a vaccine kind of scenario. So I think that, and I noticed there's a question in our chat on confidence. How do you drive confidence? Wouldn't that be nice to have, that surety? But because that's one of the things that you would think would drive confidence. But I don't think we're going to get there even with a vaccine, even if it's sort of the incredible effort we're having to get these things through phase 3 and out and distributed and all that ramp up and stuff like that. I still think it's going to take a long time, and there's going to be some of those kind of cinema type experiences for a long time, and that's what's starting to kind of make me a little bit pessimistic, and not kind of just have this sort of nirvana view of like, we're just going to get a vaccine and away we go.
I had this conversation with a colleague. I think it was on the weekend. He's in the retail business. He's actually done okay, but he's in a sort of very unique niche. And we were talking about what do we think vaccine means, and we sort of got to, well, you'll have probably 4 or 5 personality types come out that will dominate the media. You'll have, I want the vaccine. That's one group of folks. Then you're going to have the anti-vaxxer community that just doesn't believe, period. Those two are opposing. And then in between, you've got I don't know if I trust this one because it probably got fast-tracked. So I'm going to, it's not that I don't believe in it, but I'm going to wait on V1. I'm going to wait for V2. Then you've got the sort of conspiracy theory crowd that have this completely different view of what the vaccine actually is, and that they'll get a little bit of press because it sort of drives eyeballs. And then you've probably got a last community that is just sort of super cautious and doesn't know what to do, and feels paralyzed. And we were just sort of commenting that if this was the 20s or 30s, that wouldn't be, people, for right or for wrong, they would have done their part and they would have taken the vaccine. And that's it. So I think I'm with you that you've got, the vaccine is not a binary moment, and it is quite a blurry line with a whole bunch of narratives that are going to dominate the news, and science that is going to come out, and demarcation points that are going to come out. Also interesting that, Kevin, you actually said it out loud, and I'm hearing it a lot lately. June, end of May, June seems to be a time frame that a whole bunch of folks are looking. We're seeing it in our bookings, right? Where clients are calling and saying, you know, how are you looking sort of post May 1? Interesting that that's entered the narrative somehow.
Yeah, June's the new September, right? Because that's
Yeah.
what we were saying initially. Is like, oh, September. So who knows? Who knows?
Yeah.
I wish I did.
Tony, can you talk about that debt question that came in, and you know, just give us a bit of a view on that?
Yeah, it's a big question, of course, and everybody's asking it. And lots of people have sort of set views on it. I could do a lot on that. I'm just going to do a little. I think the place I always start is you just really have to understand that household debt is not the same thing as government debt. Governments, you know, you and I cannot just increase our income willy-nilly whenever we want. Governments actually can do that. We don't live forever. Governments, you know, countries sort of do, or at least that's maybe a way to think about it. And of course, we can't just fire up our own money creation printing presses. So, you know, there's a whole lot of differences between household debt and government debt. And one of those questions that's coming up right now is, you know, does the government actually really ever have to pay it back versus just rolling over the debt and letting the economy sort of grow, and so that the debt becomes, you know, not so burdensome. So it's you know, that's a starting point. But you know, if you push on people, you say, well, what is it about the debt that you're worried about? And usually it'll come down to kind of a couple of things. Taxes, I'm worried about taxes. I'm worried about inflation. I'm worried about cuts in program spending because we're spending so much on interest. But remember that, you know, if you look at the data on, for sure, cuts in interest payments, the main thing that drives that is the level of the rate that they borrow at. And that's what, 0.6% or something like that now for 10 years. So it's actually the interest, the debt servicing costs are actually super low. And, you know, here's the other thing to remember, you know, because the other people say, well, look, the intergenerational burden is going to be massive on this debt. And I actually think that's a bit of a mistake conceptually. One is, who owns the debt? We own the debt, actually. A lot of us own that debt. It's not, foreigners don't own the majority of our debt. It's the Canadians who own that debt. It's an asset on our balance sheet. So we actually, that's one thing. But maybe the more important point is, I worry much more about the intergenerational problem of having an economy that is in the dumps for an extended period of time. You know, those of you who've got kids who are starting out in their careers and so on, this is not what they want, you know, and not what you want for them. So I worry, you know, remember, we pass on the whole economy, not just the debt. And so I always kind of push that against that. But the government needs absolutely a good, solid, medium-term plan post-COVID for how we're going to kind of deal with that doesn't look too draconian. Back to the confidence question, where we're going to have, you know, massive taxes or changes in basic rules on taxes, like not allowing capital gains on your primary residence. You know, that makes people nervous and all that kind of thing. So that's where I would come from. The debt is a complicated story, but there's a, you know, couple of sides to it for sure. It's not all like something you should be completely paranoid about. You might even be paranoid about maybe we should be spending more to make sure we don't have a deeper, longer downturn or economy that is going to really harm young people, especially.
I think one of the variants of that question we got was there's only so many paths out of that, right? There's tax your way out, grow your way out, inflate your way out, et cetera. And of course, the answer is probably a combination. But to their credit, the senior folks in political circles that have spoken here at Ivy, that have talked publicly, none of them have said tax their way out is even on the list. It's not even on the table as a consideration. They've said grow their way out in various different ways, and so I think that's encouraging. Larissa, as you look at the U.S. and you look at homeowners, you look at Main Street, what do you see coming?
Well, I may change your question a little just because I want to respond a bit to what Tony was saying, but I actually think this is where banks have such a huge role to play, because we do need to keep the economy going. We do, even though this is a stormy time, banks play the role to keep the money in the hands of the individuals and the companies and corporations, right? You have the macro view, but from a micro perspective, we need to continue lending money, even though if you were to just look at the economics, this is where we should be pulling back. But the reality is banks are part of the fabric. And I would say, especially Canada, it's almost sometimes like we're expected to be a social service while still generating profits for our shareholders. That's the reality of the Canadian way of viewing things. The US is quite different, but actually it's the right thing to do, to be good actors, to continue to put the money in the hands of those who need it most, who can keep the economy going. And so when you talk about, the mortgage default rates or what's coming from Main Street, the PPP loans, things like that have really helped. Serve is another example. But the reality is that can't happen infinitely. Like the government at some point in time is not going to be able to continue to fund the economy. And there is an important role that banks play to bridge that gap, to keep things going, to think of creative ways to put hands into those who need it, to those who can actually help to continue to grow the economy. And I think, we're not going to see what happened in 2009, I don't think. I think banks are stronger and are going to be able to help those who need it. I mean, it's not to say we're going to be coming on our white horses with giant swords saving the world, but I do think we have a lot more creative things at our fingertips to be able to help, homeowners and, commercial real estate owners, retailers, whatever it might be. Not everybody's going to make it through this. We know this. A lot of those boarded up, old-fashioned department stores are going to close. It's just they're not adjusting to the new way of living anyway. They were in trouble before this even started, right? So that's not where the money's going to flow. But I do think we have really an obligation to continue to be part of this solution and to keep things moving.
I want to do one more question that came in, and I'll have a note on the other questions in a minute. But Kevin, I'll put it to you. So it came in about startups. And to paraphrase, I guess, is there an opportunity for startups? I think that's relatively obvious. Is the environment right for startups to thrive right now? That's a sort of a better question.
Yeah, I mean, so not everybody would know. I'm actually a GP in a tech fund as well. Kind of in my side hustle, I guess, if you could look at it that way. I think it's a really interesting time for startups. Obviously I'm not sure that I'd be looking to start up your next big retail venture, like physical retail venture right now. I might wait a little bit to do that one, but most of the startups that people are talking about these days aren't that. There's money out there still, and there's people willing to invest. There was a lot of companies, actually, it's been hard on some startups because if you were undercapitalized before you came into this, then it's been a challenge because, a lot of people have found it difficult to kind of commercialize over the last few months. And so the path you thought you were on probably is different than the path you've ended up being on. And it's those with deep pockets that have been able to kind of weather the storm. On the other hand, people that are out raising right now, I know we're seeing lots of interesting opportunities, and there's funds out there with money that are looking to deploy. We're not taking, a 6-month view. We're taking a 7, 8, 9 year view. It's a great time to be putting money out there because over the next 7, 8, 9 years, you're going to do really well. You just have to get out of a short-term mentality on it. I think if you've got a startup that has the right story to tell, that is focused on, the right part of the market right now, and I know that those are very kind of broad terms, but there's lots of things that fit that. Then I think it's a really great time for people to be doing this because you're going to get mind space from folks that have money to invest, and they're going to be willing to invest with you both financially and from a capabilities point of view.
That's great. I mean, we sort of started with the frame is maybe not looking so, the broad frame is not looking so great, but certainly pockets of opportunity all over and pockets of optimism in places as well. We're up against it on time. There were a number of questions about mental health and the like, and I just didn't feel like we had the experts here to properly address those questions. We'll see, Sean, maybe we can find somebody to address those offline and do a follow-up. And then there were a couple of very hyper-specific economic questions that maybe you could address in the follow-up as well. So we're out of time, Kevin and Larissa and Tony. Just fantastic. Thanks for the continued support. You always say yes when we ask, and great job today for all of you. For everyone who tuned in, thank you for the ongoing support, and we'll see you next time. Cheers.
Thank you.